So for our next project, we're going to talk about this idea of abstraction. And to understand abstraction, you have to understand the components of art. So there are four components of art: the subject matter, the content, the context, and the form. The subject matter is the what, the person, the thing. It's basically the main thing that's in a work of art. So for example, at the bottom, the subject matter would be a can. Content is the why, the message, or the emotional or intellectual meaning of the piece. So, for example, in the picture at the bottom, the content would be the sadness of the crying baby. The context is the background or the artist or the culture that it was made in. For example, if I looked at that image at the bottom, to understand the context, I'd have to know that that was New York City, a busy big city in the Western United States. The form is the how, or the design with the elements and principles. In form, we're just really looking at how it's made. Is it interesting? Does it look good? Those are all parts of the form of the art object that we're looking at. Next, we have the degrees of representation. So we have representational art and non-representational art. In representational art, the intent is to represent an idea. So it could be naturalistic to abstract. In non-representational art, there is no reference to subject matter, based only on form and content. So they're not trying to represent anything, but we're just thinking about what would make an interesting composition. So we think about degrees of representation. We're thinking about that representational part of art. On the one side, we have representational art, which could go anywhere from naturalism to realism, semi-abstraction, abstraction, to non-representational art, which is just form and content. So within representational art, we have naturalism, which is fully representational. It's very objective. You're trying to make that person or thing look exactly like that person or thing looks in the real world. Within realism, despite its name, realism is meant to emphasize the emotional content of the piece. So you might slightly change a color or change the look of a piece to get an emotional impact for the viewer. So it's not totally realistic, despite being called realism. There are subtle changes to emphasize the emotional. Within semi-abstraction, we have partially representative art with intentional distortions. So the face is shifted, things are sort of twisted or distorted, and it's either for an emotional reason or a contextual reason. There's all kinds of reasons that you might use semi-abstraction. Abstraction is the next kind of representational art. Although sometimes people think of abstraction as not representing reality, it still is based in reality. It's based on a subject matter. It can visually appear non-objective, but there's still something at that core that comes from the real world. So for example, in the Francis Bacon there, we still see a face. It's not a very realistic face. It's very distorted, but we still see some sort of base in reality. Non-representational works of art have no reference to subject matter. They're just about form and content. So we're just looking at how those elements and principles work together. So the content in a work of art is about the emotional or intellectual part of a work of art. So you're thinking about the bigger meaning behind it. In advertising, there's all kinds of little tricky things they use to get us interested in, say, having a Coke by looking inviting, showing us a seat. Artists also use it to ways to show distress or emotional meaning. There's all kinds of different content that artists try to portray through works of art. Just as a general view, right? If we're thinking about the components of art, we've got the context, which is the background of the artist, where it was made. The content is the message, the form is the design, and the subject matter is the person, place, or thing. Remember, if we're thinking about representation to non-representational, sort of on a spectrum, for your next project, you have to fall somewhere in this spectrum towards the semi-abstraction, abstraction level. We're thinking about taking a little bit away from that naturalism and moving it towards that other end of the scale.